talk is by Femke. She's a product designer at Uber, and she's going to talk through how you can organize your design documentation. We can actually, designers, be a bit messy and all over the place. Not everyone, but happens to the best of us still. Femke, how are you?
Hey, I'm good. How are you?
Very well. Thank you so much for joining. You're going to be the closing the day of talks.
What an honor.
So let's make it amazing.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sergey. And hey, everyone. Thanks so much for tuning in. I believe I'm the last talk of the day before a couple of workshops, so hopefully I can sort of do you justice. Hi, I'm Femke. If you don't know me, I'm currently a product designer at Uber. I work on the Uber Eats team, specifically working on the merchant experience, so helping us create different products and experiences to help our merchants grow and scale their store on Uber Eats. And what I want to do a little bit in this presentation, actually, I want to make it as practical for you as possible. So I'm going to spend about the first 10 minutes walking through my slides. And then in the second 10 minutes, I'm actually going to walk you through a Figma file, which I've created as a template. And I will share a link towards the file at the end of the talk, where you can actually go and download a copy of this Figma file and actually use it and take it back to your team. So hopefully you can walk away from this talk with some really practical and actionable insights. And forgive me, I'm in Toronto, Canada, and it's 6:30 a.m. at the moment, so I'm still waking up a little bit and it's a little bit dark still, but bear with me because I'm really excited to be with you here today. So design documentation. Let me know if this sounds like a familiar story to you, where you are given a project, you go away and you do some explorations, you do some research, you come up with some concepts, and you bring them to a team for a design review or a meeting or some sort of stakeholder review to get feedback and input on your designs. And in that meeting, people are really excited. You feel like you have some good discussions, some good inputs. You hear from the engineers, from the product managers, data scientists, whoever else is in the room, and you feel like you get really good alignment and good clarity on your next steps and sort of where to take the design next. So you go away, you do some iterations, some refinements, you tweak the designs, maybe you choose a chosen solution or a concept to move forward with, and then you take it back to the group. You come back to another design review or checkpoint and you show your updated designs, and all of a sudden you're met with a lot of questions or maybe pushback, or people aren't quite aligned, or they're a bit confused about some of the decisions that you made. Perhaps some of the people in the room now weren't in the room earlier on. This has definitely happened to me, and it can be really, really frustrating because I feel like we're all aligned, we're all on the same page. It was really clear to me what I had to do and what our next steps were. But then suddenly I'm faced with a lot of misalignment in the team. And I feel like this is where design documentation can really help mitigate some of this. And I feel like a lot of the times when we think and talk about design documentation, we're often talking about documentation towards the end of the design process. So often in the context of a handoff, right? Like you're handing off your designs to engineering, you need to document your whole design process, how the design and the flows work. And while that is a very important step, I do feel like there is a lot of merit to documenting your design throughout the entire design process. So rather than just waiting to the very end and only documenting the handoff, I think if we can get into a habit of documenting our designs throughout the design process, that means we're going to be able to bring everyone on the journey with us and hopefully have more stakeholder buy-in and more alignment across the team. So without design documentation, what ends up happening? I'm sure that some of these things can feel familiar to you. So maybe there's misalignment across the team where folks aren't quite on the same page. Maybe one person thought we were going to go this direction, another person thought we were going to go that direction. The why behind decisions made are unclear. I think something that for me has really helped is getting some more rationale behind my design decisions and having more conviction. And without design documentation, this can often be difficult to do. Also, we often will see a difference in expectations. Someone thought we were going to do this, but then you did that. Unknowns are left unknown because if we don't talk about them and we don't document them, then they're sort of left unknown. And I've definitely gotten to a point where it's only in handoff that Suddenly there's a new requirement, or I had a different expectation or understanding of how something worked compared to someone else. Corners can get cut, and lastly, this is very frustrating and often leads to a lot of ambiguity where we're having to fill in the gaps ourselves. And I'm sure this sounds familiar to you. This has definitely happened to me, and it's something that I'm trying to improve and have been sort of iterating with during my time at Uber to figure out how I can better document my work and bring everyone along on the journey with me. I feel like sometimes design can look a little bit like this, and I love this picture. I got it off this website, Industrial Empathy, but I actually believe I heard that Seth Godin is perhaps the original author of this. He published this on his blog and in one of his books, and I really love this illustration. Not only is it funny, but I feel like if you look at design through the lens of your collaborators, whether it's an engineer or a product manager or whoever, I feel like design to them can often look a bit like this, where like the number one here is kind of like the first design review. And it's like, okay, cool. Like I see we have a few concepts here, like looking good. And then number two is like the final design. And it's like, okay, well, how did you get from number one to number two? There's a lot of missing information there and a lot of ambiguity. And while we can document number two, if we haven't documented how we got from number one to number two, then it's really, really hard to get that buy-in and to get people along with us on the journey of design. And I feel like this illustration can also apply really well in the handoff stage of the design process, where we're giving our work to engineers. If we don't document that well, then it can look a little bit something like this. So this is something that we want to avoid. Sorry, my slide. Okay, so what is good design documentation? So I think good design documentation can help us achieve a range of things. So first of all, it allows for cross-functional alignment. Suddenly, we can get everyone on board and on the same page. It also enables us to capture design rationale. So any decisions that are behind you kind of moving forward with a design direction or a concept should be documented. I've definitely been challenged on a design decision that I made weeks or sometimes months ago. And if I haven't documented why I made that decision, sometimes I forget. And so it's really helpful to capture that rationale. It also enables stakeholder buy-in. Maybe you're taking something to a high-level design review or a leadership team. And if you have all of your decisions and discussions documented, that can help you get better buy-in when you get challenged. It's also good team hygiene. So ideally, when you are staffed onto a project, you complete that project from start to end. But I've been in situations where this doesn't happen. I've had to step in midway through a project and pick it up from another designer, or hand over a design to someone else to finish. And if there's not clear design documentation, it can be really, really hard to support your team and pick up work midway through a design process. It also helps you organize your work. How many times have you gone into a colleague's Figma file and been lost and confused? It can be really hard to find different parts of the design or sort of try to understand the decisions that they were making. And then the last few here helps you communicate your decisions to engineers. The handoff part of the process is obviously important, captures the why behind the work, and also helps you clarify next steps. So I really like this quote from a product designer, Budi Tanrum. He has a fantastic newsletter that I recommend, and this is linked here. You'll get the slides to this presentation. And he recently did an issue about design documentation. And I think these questions are really great questions to sort of ask yourself now and then and make sure you're capturing. So what was the last decision we made? Why did we make that decision? Is there any data to back it up? What was the constraint we faced? And are there any other options that we intentionally ignored? And so again, I feel like we can ask ourselves these questions throughout the design process and just check in and make sure that we're really capturing the answers to these. So what does good design documentation look like? I feel like the word documentation here makes it sound like this must be some form of written output. But I actually don't believe design documentation needs to necessarily be a written document or in written format at all. And here's just a few examples of what I think good design documentation can include. Maybe it's just having an organized Figma file, or maybe you have a design deck that walks through the entire sort of design process or journey. You could have articulated user stories, journeys, flows. Maybe you capture design review notes with action items and decisions made. Perhaps you have a link to a design source of truth or some sort of wiki where anyone in the company can go to get all the information relevant to the design. Maybe you have copy docs where you have written content away in a document somewhere. Or maybe you have a folder somewhere with exported assets and illustrations, that one centralized place for people to go to get all the assets they need. It could also include things like having a design status. Is your design in progress, blocked, completed? How do we communicate at which stage in the design process our design is at? Can include a tidy handoff, style guides, design components, libraries. Maybe you link out to certain engineering tickets in Jira or whichever tool you use. Perhaps you have a change log of all the decisions you made. Maybe you capture any out-of-scope features, graveyard work, things that you decided were not going to make it into the cut for this feature build. Always save your alternative explorations, always copy and paste, don't overwrite your work because you never know when you might need an old exploration. And then scenarios, screen logic, and so much more. So this is just a glimpse at, hopefully this is illustrating well, that it doesn't have to necessarily be some written documents. It can also be your process and your style and how you organize and communicate your work. So with that said, let's take a look at some of the resources I've created for you here in Figma. So I'm going to switch on over here to my Figma file. You can see my presentation here. And I have a few things here that I want to share with you. A couple are some slide presentations, and then the last is some documentation components. So here, this is a slide presentation that I kind of call about this project. And I put this all in Figma intentionally because we like to use Figma as our centralized source of truth at Uber. So ideally, all I have to do is share a link to a Figma file, and that's the one-stop shop for everyone in the company to go to get all the information about the design of this project. So if you can imagine anyone in the company kind of stumbling upon this Figma file, ending up in this project, they might have no context about the project, the team, what you're working on. And so I like to always have this kind of about section in every Figma file so that if somebody stumbled upon it, they can sort of easily get a sense of what this project is about. So here you can put in your team, you can outline a little bit what this project is about. Maybe you have different work streams or like a few pods within a bigger project and you're breaking it down into different phases. Here you can link to any relevant documents. Maybe there's engineering documents, problem statement, of course, and then a few of these last ones are some sort of how might we, some business use cases, product goals, design principles, and scope. So again, imagine anyone in the company jumping into this Figma file, not having context about the project. Here they should be able to get the TLDR or like the summary on what this project is about. The other deck I have in here is a design deck, and this is more of a sort of finalized overview of the design part of this project or your design process. And often I create this sort of towards the end of a project, and it's kind of part of my handoff where it captures all of the design decisions made, all of the rationale and the inputs into the design, so things like research or maybe product requirements. And so within here, the first line is kind of similar, borrows from the previous presentation, but then there's a few sections, one on problem and opportunities, product and design decisions, research and discovery, and then final designs. So in the problem and opportunities section, you can go a little bit deeper into the problem you're solving. Maybe you identify some personas that are influencing some of your design decisions. You can talk about the business impact and the overall objective, followed by product and design decisions. So here I really like to document the requirements that I get from product. And I find that often product will come to me with a wish list, right, of all of these requirements and things that they want to support. I'm sure this sounds familiar. You see that as a designer and you're like, not sure if we're going to be able to support all of these. And so I like to capture all of the requested requirements and kind of iterate here which ones we agreed are in scope and which ones are not. And you might also include here any decisions behind what kind of caused the requirement to go into which category. Success metrics are always really important. So how are you going to measure success of the project, goals and principles? And then here is a section that you can duplicate as many times as you need, which is sort of comparing options. I often find as a designer, I have multiple concepts that I kind of put forward and have a lot of discussions about and talk to engineers, PMs, etc. And we're like, which concept should we go with, this one or this one? eventually we make a decision and we move forward. However, I feel like often we don't quite take the time to document that decision and explain the rationale behind why we're moving forward in that direction. So I like to use this here to kind of illustrate those different options we explored and give a bit of context as to why we moved with said option. What were the inputs that influenced this decision? Why did we make this decision? Making sure that everyone's really on board and aligned with the direction that we're going. And this is so helpful if you get challenged later on. I've definitely had it where I've been challenged like a month later on, oh, why didn't we go with that earlier concept? And it's really, really helpful to have this documented here with some really clear rationale and conviction. So the next section is about research and discovery, and this is more of a summary. Usually we have a more detailed research report that is created by our in-house user researcher. So here I'm just kind of highlighting the high-level overview and summary of some of the research insights, just to get people on board and aligned and on the same page with what we kind of saw through the research and how that influenced some of the design decisions. And then the last section here is about final designs. And in this template, I've included a few device frames for you. You can do iOS, you can do Android, and I have desktop later on. But here you can really put in the final designs and make sure you're also captioning the screen, just to give context to the viewer what the screen above is showing. And you may also want to add some arrows here to kind of show flows and link screens together. So like I said, there's also room for desktop here as well. And so I found that having this design deck is really helpful for anyone who comes to me asking, like, what's the latest on design, or what was the final design decisions or the final outcome? Where can I see the final work? I just link them to this file or this section of the Figma file where they can really get an insight into what the design process was, how we made decisions, and what the final designs are. And the last section I have here is on documentation components. And this is a little bit more geared towards the maybe handoff part of the design process, where you could really have your final screens and states here for engineering and kind of add some documentation around the context of those screens. So I've included here at the top a status, and you can actually switch these out. Maybe you have something in progress or it's blocked at the moment. And then you can add some context as to what the screen or flow is about. Maybe it's referring to a particular release. Here you're the designer. Maybe you link out to any like engineering tickets, copy docs, assets. And then up here, you can kind of update the status of the design from an implementation perspective. And then down below, you can have the screen in question. This one is just showing two screens, and maybe you have a flow below. So this is really helpful to use for handoff. And I found at Uber, we've kind of like created this standard way of handing off our designs. So any Figma file I go into like follows the same principles and patterns for handoff, which makes it really easy for engineers to just like learn once how this process works and then be able to flex to any project. And the last little bit I have here is more of a written like documentation piece that you can use. Maybe you're having a design review or a meeting or something and you want to document the raw notes. I'll often actually document like not only what was said, but who said it, because sometimes that's really helpful context to have. And then any action items that came out of this meeting, like what are you going to go away and do next? And maybe you also want to assign those action items to certain people. And then just at a high level, any key decisions that got made in that review or in that meeting are also really helpful to document. So that is the Figma file template, and there is a short link here that I believe is going to be put into the chat, but you can also just type this in, bit.ly/2psakpl. I'll make sure that this gets out to you if you miss it, don't worry. And you can download a copy of this Figma template and use it as you wish at your company. So hopefully that's really helpful for you.